Hello, I'm Renee Noble. I'm very excited to be here today for this episode of AI Genius. I am a senior technical program manager. Sorry, I thought this was going to come up with my new title in the industry solution engineering team. I'm very excited to be here today to tell you about how we are going to build and develop your own dev experience upgrades with GitHub Copilot SDK. So this is a fun project that you can grab at this aka.ms/copilot-sdk-ai-genius, where you can play along with me as I go through this activity. And it has the finished project there, and a bunch of other resources, including like links to a course I've put together that you can do to learn more about the SDK. But let's get right into what we're going to be looking at today. Actually, let's get to a demo first, and then we will take a look at how we're going to build this. So what we're building today is this GitHub issue complexity analyzer using the SDK to look at a repo, look at a GitHub issue, which I'm going to go ahead and grab while I do this spiel. And then it's going to assess what kind of changes need to be made as part of this issue and like how complex that's going to be if you're giving this a go. And like maybe it's something that you could do if it's your first month on the job, if you're a junior developer, or is it something that's going to need a bit more experience? So I'm just going to go ahead and grab an issue from this demo repo I've set up here, just grabbing that URL, and I'm going to pop it in here. I'm going to hit analyze, and then while that analyzes, which will take like maybe a minute or so, I'm going to talk a bit more about what's in our agenda for today. So what is Copilot SDK? We're going to talk about that. We're going to do a hello world version of the project with your first call to an SDK. Then we're going to build out our agentic toolbox. So we're going to make our own tools that we can provide to the SDK. We're going to stream that responses to the browser, which you've just seen our finished project there. And we're going to talk about shipping it safely. And of course, there'll be time for questions at the end. If you want to ask questions on the way through, I'm happy to also stop off along the way, if that's more helpful to have it in context rather than right at the end. So feel free to drop them in the chat. We also have Michelle hanging out in the chat who can also answer your questions. So shout out to Michelle and shout out to the whole production team who's here as well as part of AI Genius. So let's have a look if our other thing has finished yet. Cool. Yes, it's gone ahead. So we can see here it started the analysis and it's done a bunch of different tool calls that we're going to be building out today. We are fetching the issue and what's been written in the issue. We're getting the structure of the repo. Then we're getting the actual content of the files. And then finally, we get this summary, which takes us through what the issue was. We got that assessment of what the recommended skill level is, mid-level skill recommendation here is very confident of it, which is good to know. And then some reasoning about like why this would be appropriate for this level, what files are likely to be involved, and then a suggested approach. We've also got some mentorship notes because someone who might be not, they're still early in their mid-developer journey, or they're working up from their junior to their mid-developer aspect of their career. If you could give them some tips as a mentor, you don't have to necessarily go and get in the details as that mentor who's trying to onboard someone to this idea and this issue. You can have a look at the mentorship notes to uplift someone in your team. So that's what we're looking to get out of the SDK. And then finally, we've got this post back to GitHub button here, and that's going to go ahead and post it back to here. So we can now see that that issue summaries come through, and we can also see we've got a difficulty medium set onto this issue here as well. So that's a super quick way to get analysis on an issue, something that maybe you don't always have as much time as you want to be able to do to go through your backlog and identify some great starting points for people in your team. Maybe, you might be short on staff and you're like, I wish we could get through these bugs, but I just don't have the time to help our junior developers find the right things for them. So this hopefully will be a great way to automate the overhead rather than automating doing these small tasks, because then we can uplift more people to get to that medium, mid-level and senior level part of their career so they can tackle those harder issues. So let's take a look at what is the SDK first before we get into building something with it. So we've got a lot of different Copilots in the Microsoft land and in the VS Code and GitHub land as well. So you might be familiar with things like Copilot in your editor. So you might have that ghost text autocomplete when you're typing, or you might have the chat open on the right-hand side where you chat, and then it gives you something. You might use agent mode to get it to populate things into your workspace as well. So we've got a few different things you might be familiar with already where you see the results on the screens, and it's really a tool for developers. We want to give you that tool so you can embed that kind of same technology and like agentic loop into your own apps. So this is a library for Python, JavaScript, and C#, where you install it and use it like any other library as part of your project. So just like we saw there, it's been able to go and look through our code base and then make an analysis of what this issue looks like and how to approach it. So that's using that same kind of Copilot logic that it's got built into the model, but letting us put it inside something else. So it's really a building block for your application where you receive that Copilot analysis or whatever you're trying to do, and then you do something with the result yourself. So that is the idea behind Copilot. And how that actually works in practicality is we've got something called the agentic loop. That means we kind of have this ongoing series of things that keeps happening until our task is complete. And we start with the initial prompt that we get sent. So this one might be analyze GitHub issue. We'll talk a bit about having a prompt that gives it a bit more context on what you want to do. But that is essentially the initial thing that we start with. Then we will have the model request to a tool. So it's going, hey, I've got a bunch of tools that you've provided me that you've coded up yourself. I've decided that this one, based on the description you've given me, would be the best one to use, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. So here, we're going to go ahead and execute that tool where we're going to get back some results. So we've got more context in the form of a string that goes back in and kind of becomes part of this ongoing context that we build until we can get that final resolution to the initial prompt that we've sent. So how is this going to come together? We're going to be building this ultimately the analyzer web app that you saw in the demo, but we're going to start with just using some existing GitHub tools. So there's lots of API endpoints for GitHub, including one where you can get the issues and the content of them, one where you can get the content of a repo, and one where you can get the content of different files and search through all of that. So it's kind of the information we need to be able to build our tools. So we're going to create 4 different custom tools that help us leverage existing APIs from GitHub, and they're going to be part of our Copilot SDK tool logic kit that it is able to access as part of that agentic loop in the Copilot client and the Copilot session that we're going to set up. So those 2 parts are part of the SDK, and we're plugging in our custom tools into that to make it useful for our use case. Then we have that Copilot client. It's going to link in to a FastAPI web server. If you don't know too much about FastAPI, don't worry. We've done a lot of the web server stuff, and we're going to show you all the stuff. It's not too hard. We're only making a couple of endpoints here, so no worries if this is your first time. And we're going to be calling that client and that session that we've created in the backend through this FastAPI server, which of course is called from the front end. As we saw when we clicked that analyze button, we can trigger that analysis. We can see the different parts of the streamed response with the different tool calls coming in. And then we had that final button where we can post it directly back to our GitHub issue. So we've given you the front end, so you don't have to write any JavaScript or any HTML today. And of course, GitHub API stuff is already done for you as well. So that's all good to go. So we're just going to be focusing on creating this client session, Copilot session, and the custom tools, and then just doing a little bit of hooking up to make it available to the front end with FastAPI. So that's what's on our plate for today. So let's get to it because we've got a bunch of stuff to write. So I'm going to be using Codespaces today. So if you haven't used Codespaces, you can jump in here in the green button, and you can make your own Codespace with the plus. I've already got one set up because I wanted to make sure it was already running for you when we got here. And that's actually how I am running the complexity analyzer. I'm actually running that from my Codespace that it's already there. I've added in some buttons for you through our run debug menu here. And you are able to then, if you want to run what the final code looks like, you can click run web app server final, and that will run something on the localhost 8001 port from your instance of Codespaces, and then it'll give you a pop-up so you can open that in the browser. Once we've built out our web server for the one we're going to build together today, you can click this one and you can run your own code. But we're going to make a few other CLI versions that we're just going to run in the terminal along the way. So we've got a few things to do there. But before we get started, we are going to be needing a GitHub personal access token for this project. So there's a few different ways to authenticate for being able to do both the SDK aspect of this, as well as when we do that final push back to GitHub to the issue, you'll need this specific personal access token method. So there's a few ways to authenticate for the SDK, and the personal access token is the way that we want to do it for that push back to GitHub. So because we can use the personal access token for the purposes of the SDK, we're just going to go into that method, and I'm going to do a quick demo on how you can do that. Super easy if you haven't done it before, but let's get going on that one. So I'm just going to go back to my GitHub page here. I'm going to click on my face. I'm going to go to settings, clicking through here, and then we're going to scroll down to developer settings. And we are going to go to personal access tokens classic. And then I'm going to generate a new token, classic. And then all I need to do that is firstly authenticate, because that's important. And then we are going to go ahead and make the token. We just need to give it one level of access to get into here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a name. This is my demo, AI Genius 1, something like that. I'm going to give it the repo level 1. And because I already have a bunch of these, I'm going to give it only 7 days. Always do the least amount of time you need for this. And I'm going to generate that token. And then you're going to see something here. And you can copy that. And then, look, I'm going to delete this because I've just shown it to you. But then you could copy that. And then let's jump across to where you're going to paste it in. You're going to need to make a copy of where is it? Our .env example, calling it .env here. So my grayed out one. So you just got to get rid of the example. And then you're going to paste in your token here, just like that. But I've already got one. I'm not going to put that on the screen because that would be silly to do. We do have a couple of people asking in the chat for the link. So hopefully Michelle could grab this link for us so everyone can play along as well. It's just here, this one here, aka.ms/copilot-sdk-ai-genius. And we're going to get started on making that various app. So yeah, there we go. Back in we go to get started. To code along, you're going to want to jump into app.py. That's where we're going to do our coding today. We have now done phase 0, this should say. Phase 0. Now, phase 1, I've done for you because it's not fun for me to explain, for you to have to copy and write all this out. So here we go. We've got just a bunch of libraries. They've all been installed if you're using Codespaces already through the dev container that gets set up when this gets spun up. You can also use the dev container locally in VS Code. And if you are running it without a dev container in VS Code, there are instructions on how to install these libraries, which are all in the pyproject.toml file that is here. But but mostly you can see our Copilot libraries here, which we'll be using to set up our session and to interact with it. And our load.env file is going to load stuff from that .env file for us, which will just make it nice and easy to handle our environment variables for this stream. Okay, so first we want to start with Hello World. Our simplest one, we need to start by creating a client and starting that client. So if you want to think about this as like making a phone call, we're saying, hey, we want to dial a phone number to create this client, and then we're going to call the number to start the client. So saying we need to like establish that connection and authenticate that client. So to make sure we are actually authenticated to the client, we're going to be using the token that we've just created through the GitHub interface, which goes here. So that's just using that .env file. Or if you have them also stored in your environment variables, this line will also grab that out of there. So it's got either way, nice and easy for that to grab that, and you have to worry about it. Okay, here is the most important part of the Hello World example. It is where we make the session. So we've got a client and we've got a session. So this is like a phone call that will say, hey, this specific phone call. So I guess we'd say the client was kind of establishing a connection with your telecom company. We're now paying our phone bills, but now we can make phone calls with our session. And we've got a few different specifics we can put in as part of making this call and making this specific session connection. So I've put in a model here. You can use whatever model you like. You're also able to use like bring your own model option. So if you have a Foundry model or other models that you have access to, you can plug that in here as well. Just look up the docs on how to do that if you have a URL and stuff for that. On permissions request, this is saying, hey, for the purposes of this, just approve any permissions that are required, for instance, tool use. But you might want to add a custom handler if you had some things that like, yeah, these tools, they're fine to use, but this one, always ask my permission. I need to be the human in the loop if you're going to use this tool, like maybe it's for deleting something or who knows what. So that's a good responsible AI moment there if you are doing something that has destructive capabilities. Finally, we're passing in that token to say, hey, yeah, this is us, and we are okay to use this SDK, like this Copilot license that we have access to. So that's setting that up. Now we get to the part that's going to be like, okay, yeah, cool. That looks like a normal like text message or phone call. We're going to send and wait for a response from our session. So sending off, what is GitHub Copilot SDK in 2 sentences? And then we're going to wait for that response. And if we get a response, so I will note that these are all async functions, which is helpful when we want to add this to our front end and our FastAPI connection. That way we are not blocking on having these calls, which do take a bit of time to generate if you had other things that you were running on this endpoint. So there, just a note there on why that is async def hello world. So here we go. We've got the response. If it has content, then we're going to print out that content. And that's going to be the sentence that we get back describing Copilot SDK. Finally, once we've got that, we're all good to go. We're going to disconnect this phone call and stop the client. We're now canceling our telecom connection. We don't need to ever make a phone call again. You could, of course, keep that open for other things if this wasn't a toy example. So to make this nice and easy, I've put the commands you need to run to get it going just at the bottom of each section. So now I just need to get my terminal back. I hid it. New terminal. All right. And we're going to pop this in here and then hope that everything's been set up correctly. But fingers crossed, it's a nice, easy project to get started with. And we're just waiting a hot minute. Here we go. Okay, everything's working, guys. Copilot SDK is a set of tools and APIs, etc., etc., etc. I'll let you read your own sentence or the docs for that description, but it is working. So great. We now have our Hello World example. But when we get to the point where we have a bigger chunk of text, you could see that it was actually took a while to generate this as it is. But we might, have a massive chunk of text like we have when we get our complexity analysis, and also just all these tool calls. It's nice to know that stuff's happening along the way rather than having to wait for the whole thing to be done. So we're going to be looking at streaming our responses today. So now we're going to do Hello World again, but now we're going to stream it as we go. This isn't going to look very different because it does just kind of give us this one chunk of text rather than individual words, but it will let us set up for the next thing that we need to do. Okay, so some of this I've given to you already because this chunk of stuff here is the same as before. So we're just going to do the next part down, which is how we're going to look out for the different events that we might get, and then how we are going to handle each of those. So we first need to set up our async IO event watcher. Here we go. Whenever I read it, I want to say asyncio, but that is, I don't think that's what it is. async IO, and then we're going to set up a function that is what we're going to put into our event handler. So we're going to just call on event, and this is going to handle a couple of kinds of events at this stage, which we're going to build on this as we extend this project. So it's going to handle if you get a message or if nothing's happening anymore and it's all done. So that's, when we hang up the phone at that point. So the first part is if we have an event type that has the value of assistant message, then we want to go ahead and print out the content just like we did above. Lost some of my comments there. There you go. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to print something out. Too easy, just like we saw earlier. And then we are going to, if it is session idle instead, we are going to say the events, we're done here, setting that there to nothing. And then we can go ahead and once again, well, first we need to register this event handler, but then we're nearly done there before we send the message up again. So register the event handler. I'm actually going to put that above this comment. Cool. Saying, hey, I wrote this function. When an event happens, look at this. It'll tell you what to do. Then we just need to send the message as we did earlier. And then we just wait till it's done. So that's, hey, we've covered all our bases, everything's done. And then we're going to go ahead and print a blank line just to be like closing that page of the book and disconnect our phone call. So that one, hopefully, nice and all right to follow. But now we'll be just handling different things as they come in. So let's give it a run. I think it's going to look a lot the same because we do just have this one message that comes in rather than the message itself isn't streamed. But it is, going to happen like that. So all in all, looks the same, but it's going to be really helpful later. And we've now got our streaming set up and we know how to handle events with Python and async.io. Okay, cool. We are on to phase 3. This is where we're going to do all the tool stuff. So we talked about this briefly before. Here we go. We've got to make our 4 different tools that we have available as part of this. So we are going to be making tools for fetching the issue details, exploring the structure of the repo, searching for keywords that might have turned up in the GitHub issue. So we're going to just target specific files and then reading those specific files. So I'm not going to go through every single one in detail because that's just going to be a little bit hard to write. It's like, 100 or lines of code, but we'll go through 2 of them pretty in depth, I would say. I'm going to say we have started by giving you this helper function. It's just going to make a normal HTTP call to the GitHub endpoint. So we've got the token that we set earlier, and this is just setting up the headers for that HTTP request. And then here we'll be passing in the different endpoints. So that endpoint is going to be like, hey, we want to use the API for the issue API. And we're going to also include the query parameters in that endpoint. So that's how that detail is going to get into there when we call this function with those endpoint parameters. So that's going to be used in all of our functions as well as in our send back to GitHub at the end. But that one's like a freebie from us. So let's get into our first tool, fetching the issue details. So because we are using tools, we do need to have a few bits of infrastructure around that. So we're going to have to write this class first, which kind of describes the shape of the data because we need Copilot SDK to know what that shape is. So it can expect, know what to handle, what it is. and we'll have the description of each of those parts. Because if it doesn't know what a string that it receives back is, what the context of it is, it's not going to be able to make very good decisions around it. So for this one, we've got the repo owner, we've got the repo name itself, and the issue number. So we had that earlier, like we just had this example. This is my personal repo at Renee Noble. And then we've got demo project with issues. And finally, we've got the issue number. So those are going to get parsed out. We've provided a helper function as well, just for getting those bits and pieces out, because that's normal Python. That's not the exciting part of today. So that's at the bottom of the file, which also has all of the things that help run all these different endpoints from the terminal. So a few more freebies there. So we can get to the fun part, which is building the tools. So here we've got 2 strings, the owner and the repo, and an int, which is a number. We've also got the descriptions on each of those. And then we're going to have a description, as you can see here, on this decorator that's going to go above this function. So in here, in this async def get GitHub issue, we're going to put our code for actually grabbing that GitHub issue, just using the GitHub issue API. So this is essentially going to be a wrapper around the GitHub issue API, but we're adding this description onto it and defining it as a tool, so that later Copilot SDK is going to go, hey, what's in my tool chest? Oh, cool, I want to get the issue. And that's what this says this does. So that's that agentic loop at work, and it's going to be able to decide here in our second phase, what tool should I use for this part of the project, this part of my analysis. So we've got our setup above here with what it's going to do, and we're just going to need the query parameters, which are going to be this shape, so the owner, repo, and issue number. So that's why we've defined that up here. Okay, so first up, I'm going to put this all in a try except, because we do want to handle those errors. So this is going to be the try part, and then I'm just going to copy and paste the except in there because that's boring. So if it doesn't work, we're just going to get the error. That's going to give us some information, but hopefully it's all going to work great and it's going to be beautiful. So we are going to start by getting the issue number, getting the issue contents. So we're going to say, hey, this is the issue. Use the GitHub API helper function here from above. And I'm passing in the owner, the repo, and the issue number from here, so it can grab those out of there. Cool. We're also going to do the same. Sorry, we should be saying this is an F string if you haven't used this before. So this is the endpoint. So we're going to add that together. So we've got the params that have come in here through this shape. I've set it back to front. We've got these things, and we're going to rebuild that URL that we've got with an F string, which is a way you can just put your variables inside of a string so it looks like what you're trying to build. So that's why it looks like a URL, and the curly brackets have all our variables inside it. Same for the comments. We want to get any comments that have been put on this issue as well, because if someone's gone around and like, this is a really hard one, I don't even know if anyone can do it, this is going to be so hard, or someone might be like, this is a nice, quick, easy one, great for a junior developer or something, that's going to be a great hint to have for our analysis. So we're going to get those both. And then we are going to, from our tool, as I said, they need to return a string so we can go into the context of the greater decisions that are going to be made in this analysis process. So we're just going to go, okay, cool. We've got the title and the body of the issue from what it was returned from our first API request there. And we've got any labels that are part of this issue as well, and a user who's made it. And then finally, any comments as well to add. We could have a whole list of comments as part of this. So we're building all of that context out, and then we're going to return that to the SDK. We'll be able to get that out and like, okay, cool. I know more about this issue now. Now I know what keywords I might want to look at if I'm going to do the keyword search or the different parts of the analysis. So we've got that, and we've got our accept already run. So that's tool number 1 is ready to go. Of course, we can't run this until we have all of our tools in place, because otherwise we're just going to get the GitHub issue. So we're going to go ahead and once again do the explore repo structure one. Once again, we've got one of these classes, the shape of the data that we need. This one's going to have the owner, the repo, and the path, because now we're going to be looking at different parts of our file structure. So it might be like, look in this directory or look at this whole chain of things down to this specific file in our tree structure. So we've got descriptions of those again. Once again, the repo owner, the repo name, and the directory path for where we want to have a look at. And once again, this is just going to hit some endpoints for our GitHub API. So we're just really using what the GitHub API has on offer, but putting it in terms of how it's going to work as part of our project. So that's our try and accept again. And then we are going to use the items. We want to get the contents. We're going to store it in something called items here. So we've got all of the items that we might have along from a particular path request here. And then, so we're using, as you can see in here, we've got the contents API. We're going to that API endpoint with the parameter of our path that's we've been passed in. So the SDK, as part of that tool calling cycle, is calling it with these parameters. So it's making those decisions of like, hey, I have a tool that can investigate a particular path. It's probably going to start at the top level being like, I wonder what files and folders are in the top level. And it was like, hey, this one says source. This one says static. This one says this. And it's going to have all of that information. Be like, source, I know that's normally where the source code for an app lives. I'm going to go in there next and do that next level of investigation. So it's deciding what to put in when it calls these tools. Okay, so we've got our items, and then if it's a list, we want to go through each of those things. So, by go through, I kind of mean return it as a joined string, because now I've got multiple things. So if you've not used join before, sorry, that should be indented. That's inside our try. That's why that's upset. Cool, there we go. And tab that one in as well. If it's a list, we're going to join everything together so we can get it out as one string. Also going to only do it for 50 items because otherwise it's just going to be too much stuff. So give us 50 items, squish it together. And then also if it's a folder, put a little folder emoji in front of it. If it's a file, put this little paper emoji in front of it because that's cute. You could also do D for directory and F for file, but this was cuter. And then one last thing, if it's not a list, it will just be a singular item. So we're just going to return the file and that individual path. So that is our second tool for like, hey, how do we look through this whole file structure? And it's able to do that one chunk at a time, depending on what it thinks is the most useful thing for it to do next. Okay, cool. I'm going to do this one as a whole chunk. This is our search code. So this is just saying, kind of like if you went to a GitHub repo and you wanted to search for a specific thing. Here we go. Go to a file, but more likely if you are in your repo. Sorry, here we are. You could do Control F, Control Shift F, and I could search for a keyword in here, and then it would be just kind of like that because we want to have that keyword search look up for things that are appearing that seem of note in the GitHub issue. Once again, it's deciding what those query parameters are going to be for the search keywords. And like, it would be really good if I could look at where this reference to this class was made, how many places is it used. That's all going to be really useful information. So we're going to hit up a different endpoint for that one. So it has our repo and it's got our various query parameters going on here, as well as this page 10 items. And we're just going to be getting a small chunk of those because do remember you have a limited context window. The more stuff you put into your context window, the more difficult it's going to be able to manage all of that stuff. Hopefully, if you're doing the right searches, and by you, I mean the SDK, because you've given it enough context, it's going to be able to do some targeted queries to get the right files into the context. So it's not cluttering everything up with too much information. So yeah, we've got that. We've got our file paths, and then you might also get nothing's matching. So that's going to be interesting for it to be like, I've done this query. for this thing that seemed really important, but I can't find anything about this in this repo at all. That might make this a lot more difficult. Or maybe it's like, oh, this is a fresh start, a nice way for a mid-level developer to give a new take on this. So it's going to be informing it one way or another. So that's number 3, our way where we can search specific query parameters. The number 4 is going to be our file contents. So I'm going to pop this in as well. Okay, cool. So once again, this kind of got the same shape as above, with the path, the owner, the repo. And then this one's going to be targeting specific files. This one looks a little bit more specific than the other ones, which were essentially a wrapper around an API call. And that's essentially just because we need to decode it. So this one is saying, hey, get the contents of this path, this file. And when you get it, decode it using this decoding tool, and just get only 5,000 characters of it, because otherwise we're going to clutter that context window as well. And then we are going to return it, unless we couldn't decode it. Sometimes you get that if it's not a file that you're currently, that's the format that you might expect. Maybe something like a PDF, maybe it's not able to decode that. I'm not exactly sure what is encoded in base 64. But yeah, that you might get different things depending on what kind of files are being queried, or if it's cropped for some reason. So that is our 4th and final tool. It's going to be time to put them to the test now by using them in a system prompt CLI. So we're going to make a tool. Once again, we can run from here. So we're going to make a command. It's going to do that whole analysis using our tools, but not adding it to the front end yet. So let's get those tools in there. So all we need to do here is make a list of the tools. So we had those 4 functions that were all decorated with a define tool and a description of what it does. So we're going to pop those 4 in here and a list. Great. That's step 1 of making the tools usable. We're going to have to only other step is give it to the session. But before we do that, I'm going to copy in this system prompt. I did have that example of analyze this GitHub issue. That's not kind of going to really give us what we want in terms of structured output, in terms of what we're looking for. Because what does analyze mean? We need to kind of tell it what we are expecting to get back. So instead, I'm going to have this whole system prompt instead, because this is telling it how we want it to behave, how we expect our output to come back as well. So it's got steps on fetch the issue, explore the repo, search for relevant source files, and provide a structured complexity analysis assessment here. So we've said, hey, you should be using these tools. Get the issue, look at the repo structure, and then search and read. So that's describing how to go about it. And then when I get it back, I want it to look like this. And this is really reflecting in markdown form the shape that we want it to be. So we've got the issue summary, the complexity, the reasoning, files likely involved, and you've seen all of this before in this shape right here. So this is how it knows how to do that. So we've got that all working there. Now we need to just go ahead and add in our tools. So we've actually got that done here for you, because it's just adding this line here to what we had set up before, which was just creating that session, but now we have the tools added. Okay. Now, the only thing is we have another kind of event we're going to be handling, because we had assistant message before and we had session idle. So on our on event handler now, we just have one more. I'm going to pop that in, and we can just have a look at tool call. Tool call execution start is what it's going to look like. It's called. And if we get a tool call, I want to get the attributes. So I can say, hey, we use the get the GitHub issue tool, or we use the get content tool. Because that way, especially when we do it in the front end, we can see how we have all these different folders for the getting the structure and the searching with the magnifying glass. You can view different things depending on what tool calls have come through. So we've got that all there now. And then we need to, of course, set that on a session on event 1 again. This has got an indent that's wrong. There we go. Everyone get in line. Okay. And then we've got our system prompt, which is now going to call, using the one we created above, analyze the issue number. So when we call this function, we're going to provide that issue number, the owner, and the repo, just as we've seen in the live version. And then, yeah, it's going to run that. Cool. So I'm going to run that in the terminal now. But I'm going to, while we do that, I'm going to start on the explanation of the final part. Because it's a big project to do in 45 minutes. So hopefully, we've got Aaron also in the chat. So thank you, Michelle and Aaron, for being in there. This is great to have extra people because there's just so much content, because there's so much you can do here. So we can see already we're getting those tools showing up with that streaming that we already set up earlier. So now we can really see why that streaming comes in handy. Okay, so while that's happening, we can see you can truck along in the bottom here. Let us quickly set up how we're going to do this last one, which is getting it out to the front end with some routes. So we firstly need, I've already set up some of this for you. This is saying, hey, I've got some static files. That's my HTML. That's my JavaScript. That's my CSS. That's going to be here. You can pick that up. That's already done for you, so you don't have to worry about that. This here is also just how we set up, say, hey, I've got a FastAPI app. When I run the server, I want you to run this thing. It's going to have these different routes as part of it. All right, we'll put in some basic routes for us. I'm just going to pop these in. They're not very interesting. This one is the site that we go to that has, when this was blank and just had there, that's the basic one. That's our home page. Let's just serve up our index file. We've got a health check if you need that to say, hey, my app is in fact working. But the main one that we're going to care about is the part that actually does that analysis. So this is going to be like, hey, I have this repo, this and this issue that I want analyzed. I'm going to hit this endpoint and it's going to say, oh, I know a function for that. It's called stream analysis. And it's going to be basically what we've done here in our command line. But it's going to send it back to the front end. So let's just grab that verbatim. And if you need to learn more about FastAPI and things, there's lots of courses out there. Or I've done other series on Flask and stuff. So basically just setting up these routes to say, hey, analyze stream. This is what this URL goes to in our app. Please run this thing. And we're going to use the streaming response, which we're going to right now, which is the most important part of this one, and is basically the same thing we've been doing this whole time. So we've got all of our session stuff set up just as before. Once again, the main thing that's going to be different here is the on-event happenings. So instead of using the exact same setup for the event happening before, we're going to create a queue just so we can push things out one at a time in order of them coming in to the front end, because we do need to make sure it's going to have a bit more of a delay, and we might have multiple things potentially happening at the same time if we had things running in parallel. So we just want to make sure everything gets in the queue, goes out in the order it came in. So then we have our on event, which I'm going to pop in here and I'm going to talk through quickly. So basically the same as before, but now instead of just printing it out to the console like we have done here, and we can see that all our tools have been used and it's come up with a summary, which is great. We now want to add it to the queue. We've put no wait because we just want it to send immediately. We don't want it to wait for something else to happen. We just want to stream it in real time. And it's essentially what we did above, but now we're just we're parsing the arguments that we're getting from the front end and from our tool call, because we know, oh yeah, we've got a bunch of different things. We've got different tools. They kind of have different shapes data. So we need to grab that out so we can then send it to the front end so we can render the right emojis, which is really what this is all about when we do run that. Then, yes, we've got our three different kinds, which was our message, our tool call, or our idle session. And then finally, well, not finally, we do need to do our call our endpoint with our system prompt that we defined above. And then we are going to be streaming these as they come in. So I'm going to pop this here. And this is the part that handles that kind of streaming to the front end. Here we go. We're missing our while. Okay, so we've got, depending on what our event type and data is, we send some kind of message to the front end. It might have some content, like if we get the big message at the end that says, this is the analysis, or we might have the tool call, which will just have some data about like the name of the tool, etc. So we've got all that going on. And then of course done, and we disconnect. So that should all be ready to run. I'm going to switch over to here to my run server, and that should be good to go. Fingers crossed, everybody, that that's going to run here in a second. I'll pop up a little window, and then we can go and run a tool. I'll do a quick analysis of safety stuff you might want to be aware of if you're doing this, and it should give me a little button. Come on, button, so I can open it. Because if I open HTTP 0008000, that's going to be my actual local host. So Codespaces does do some mapping of the different ports to things in the cloud. So this is how this is working. And I'm going to grab, we're just going to guess another issue. And any second now. Cool. Let's do issue number 4. See what comes up here. So cool. I'm nearly at, basically, I am at time on how much time I have for content. So we'll go to questions in just a section, and we'll see this is running here right now. That's starting our analysis. Off it goes. We'll quickly just say, I've added in this code already because I didn't think we'd have time to go through it, and we don't, about just how we do those pushing back with that button that goes, hey, push this back to GitHub. Once again, it's just a GitHub API endpoint, and we just provide it some information. So this one, we've got just a mapping of like, we look through our code, the response we get back. If it has assessed that it's a junior level, then it's going to say, put some tags onto the issue for good first issue and difficulty easy. So we've got that aspect. And then also we just have the part where we just pick up the whole piece of content and post it as a comment. And we just go, let's pop all of this in here with the body of our information that we've got. So that's that on how we actually build that. Let's have a check of it. It's still going. Hopefully it's all going fine, because it should be exactly the same as our final one. But just a note on safety and responsible AI when we're doing this. We do, if you imagine you had posted that and you've made that part of your workflow, and then we just had that button at the end open to anybody. So anybody who can go to your repo could generate an analysis and then post it to your repo. People might just be generating analyses which are going to just use like a lot of tokens if you've got that hooked up to your personal account. And then they could just be spamming your pushback to your repo and just flooding you with different analysis and things like that. So that's one thing to think about, having a human in a loop or making sure this is locked down to people in your organization and things like that. Another thing to do and think about is if we run this analysis and people, if you don't have the right safety net involved, you might be getting an analysis that prints out things like, oh, yeah, there's a bug in the .env file for some reason. And if someone was able to query with the correct kind of things, like make an issue and then run this analysis on it, or have it potentially automatically run if you hook this up to a GitHub action, then they could make an issue on a public repo. And then some things that are kind of hidden in your repo, they might be part of your repo's secrets or credentials or other things, could potentially be printed out to a public comment, which would not be ideal. So we have both on pre-tool use, and you can also have post analysis or post-tool use as well, to a way to look at and validate arguments. So here's an example of how you could validate those arguments of saying, hey, I see that you've asked to look at the .env file, and actually that's a sensitive file. Anything that says I want you to look at this is actually right out. We can't do that, and that just blocks that tool use. So as I said at the top, we have just had permissions that say, hey, any tool use is fine here because this is just on my local host. But before you push this to production, do think about how you would need to protect this to make sure that no one could look at any secret information, credentials, and things like that. And that anything that is like that isn't going to get posted publicly, can only be run by people who you trust in your organization and who are allowed to use your tokens. Otherwise, you might run up a big bill that you don't want to be on the hook for someone random on the internet who's having their own fun time today. So I'm going to go to questions. If there are any great ones in the chat that we want to go over, if Michelle or Aaron wants to point them out to me, or if Cynthia wants to pop them up on the screen, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll be scrolling for a second. Great question from Cells26. Would I be correct in saying that the SDK is for when you need the agent to fire without a human initiating it, triggering by an event, a schedule, or an API call, or another system? So it's kind of really whatever you want it to be. So it could be a customer or a user triggering something to get an analysis like this. And it doesn't have to be for GitHub. It could be for any system. But it is where you want it to have that agentic loop, where based on the descriptions you've provided, it's able to use those different tools in service of completing a goal. So this one's a nice, easy one, I think, to think of as a developer, but really you could use that for this could be a way to look at any files or you could write a bunch of instructions in the form of Markdown or other things. And then you can then loop on that for a specific targeted goal. So really the SDK, it's still pretty new, but the sky's the limit on thinking about how, if I have information and tools on how to handle that, how can I be if I was a human who had this at hand, how would I create a cycle to get the right information to make a decision myself? And if that's something that you can at least in part hand off to the SDK to do some of that iterative process, and then potentially there could be a human in the loop. As I said, you can have different permissions in that structure. Let's just point to one of those where we set up the session. Sorry. Here we go. We have it on permission request, auto approve. But if you had something that's just oh, we want all of these things to happen, and then I decide something, and then it can continue with the process, that could be part of this. I'll also note that you could use this as part of a Microsoft Agent Framework as a subcomponent of a workflow. And that might be another interesting way that you're I have a very rigid workflow that I want to follow for safety reasons potentially. But this part, I do need it to have that iterative approach to think about different aspects of what's going on. And then figure it out based on the context that it gathers, based on what it learns along the way. But you could have the rest of that constraint from Microsoft Agent Framework around that gives you that flexibility to kind of make that hybrid approach. Is SDK working with MCP servers? You can do it with MCP servers. I could have used the GitHub MCP server in this example instead of the SDK, potentially. I went with the GitHub API raw endpoints just because it's kind of the most intuitive without adding the additional layer of MCP that's also available. So this one is just saying, hey, I've got a tool, use that. But you could link this up to your own MCP servers as well, or something like the GitHub MCP server, if you just gave a description of what that MCP server should or could do in the context of your own app creation. Any other questions in the chat that I might have missed? Let us go check out if this, oh, it's lost connection. That's really sad. What's going on? Let's run it again. Otherwise, no, actually, I'm just going to run it. Let's refresh you. Fingers crossed. This should be working
because we've just built it from our my final file that I've had here on the side, app_final, to make sure it's all matching. So I don't know why it is not happy, given we just ran our demo one from here a second ago. Let's open it again. Hopefully it was just sleepy the first time around. Let's find out what's in number 4. Otherwise, while we do this, I will do the wrap up with all the other things you might want to know about, and we'll come back to this in a second. And if anyone has any last questions, I can jump in to here. Is the post to GitHub issue button broken? It shouldn't be broken. If you're trying the final one, it should be fine, because we did see that one worked. When I was running this in like my practice runs, I did at one point just have it fail, and I wasn't sure why. And I clicked it again and it did run, but we've seen that did appear. So that's interesting. So is this number 4? Cool. It has run this time. So I think it was just a bit sleepy the first time around. It is assessed this one as mid-level. Let's see if this button is working. Post to GitHub issue. And let's go back to number 4. See that it appears. Great. Cool. It's added that tag and also that summary. This one's a lot shorter, I see. So nothing too hard going on here. Nice succinct description of how we can go about that. So hopefully that's a bit helpful. Yes, so connections for MCP, once again, you need to define them as tools. So you have to give it that description. Let's go to one of these decorators. Because yes, this way we're saying, hey, SDK, we've got this tool. If this is a tool, I'm going to list it in the tools when I give them to you later. So that's an important part of defining this as a tool and declaring it to be a tool. And then having this structure as well with the this shape of data that we've got here. This is using Pydantic if you want to look up more about like what this shape is. And it's also something that works well with FastAPI for data input and output validation, which is also really handy. So we can see it's got all these typing things to make sure that types match up. And then we've got these descriptions as well, which are important. So the SDK knows how to run it. So you need to do that, like padding around the MCP server to make sure it fit in like a little puzzle piece. Got to put the little parts that join up to the rest of the puzzle around. But you could use whatever tool you wanted in here. You could have it just, you could be calling out to another OpenAI endpoint in here if you wanted. If you had a tool that did something that you can really do anything in a tool that you can imagine, if you can see how that would be useful as part of your workflow. It's up to you guys. So I'd love to know how you can see this becoming something, because it's really like just the start of what you can do. And so, yeah, let me know if you do something cool with it. But for now, let's jump across to where you can learn a little bit more about this. Here is the repo for the session again, aka.ms/copilot-sdk-ai-genius. That's today's repo. You can play along with that. There's also, if you want to represent it, there's also presenter material in there as well, and something to make sure that all your keys and stuff, I'll actually just show you that quickly, which I use and gave to everyone else who's redelivering this in other languages after this, which is really exciting. There's a pre-stream check that just makes sure all of your stuff is working. So if you're having any trouble with your your push back to GitHub button, maybe run this pre-stream check to make sure that your .env file is working and all your validation stuff, like all that's already working. Authentication, sorry. But if you want to keep on learning, I have put together a Copilot SDK for beginners course here. So you can jump onto that aka.ms link here to give that a go. I have actually just moved out of DevRel and into industry solution engineering. So I didn't actually get to finish this. So let me know if there's anything that you're like, oh, this could have more or less. I didn't get to fully edit it. So hopefully you like it. But feel free to make any comments back and like, hey, this would be better if it was like this. Let me know. And you might learn that it could be better like this by reading the Copilot SDK docs here at this aka.ms/copilot-sdk. So hopefully those links will be useful to you. We've done question time. You can have your one final minute. We do have this session feedback
for today. I'd love your feedback to know what you thought of today's session. So do that as well. And then if you missed out on the session, you can scan this and also see the rest of the AI Genius series on the other session. Sorry, because this is the 3rd episode in the series, which is exciting. So there's been some other cool ones. So check out what the other sessions were about. Also, if you're like, I really need to watch this again, but in Korean, that's coming up, later after this. So you can go and look at the whole series. And then you can get your exclusive badge for coming along today by scanning this QR code here for your LinkedIn or wherever you want to display that you've come along and you've done some AI Genius certification with this SDK workshop. So thanks again for being here. I've really enjoyed showing you this project. And then finally, do get involved with Build. So Microsoft Build is coming up just at the start of June. Make sure to watch if maybe you're going in person, that's really cool. But if you're not, you can watch online as well. So scan this QR code to find out about what the different sessions are. And you can learn a whole bunch about different stuff. I'm sure Copilot will be a star as always. But yeah, get on all of those QR codes. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for you today. And then it's thank you for coming. So yeah, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along and being part of this session and for asking questions in the chat. Shout out to Michelle and Aaron, as well as Cynthia on production and the whole AI Genius team. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you. I'm Renee Noble. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this session. I'll catch you guys later.